So today I'll show you how to remove your hammer, mainspring and trigger assembly of an AK pattern rifle. So the first thing is we're gonna tilt the safety up to its safe position and just keep going, and we'll be able to lift it out of the receiver once it's pointing directly upwards. The next part is to unhook the mainspring. So this is what catches on the trigger here, also puts force on the hammer. And first we want to decock the hammer, so put your finger on the hammer, pull the trigger, slightly let it go forward, and now we're going to hook the two sides of the mainspring. So this part, this end of the spring and this end of the spring, we're going to try to hook it on the hammer. So this will make disassembly way easier. And I'm just going to use a pick or a hook, grab the main spring and kind of hook it on the hammer. And here be careful to not let it go. If it catches your hand, it can be quite annoying, to say the least, having this spring energy hooking into your hand. There's nicer things. So once you have them hooked, be careful. You're gonna grab a rubber band just to make it less annoying for further disassembly, because now if you touch them and they slip, they're gonna move into this direction again. So just gonna grab a rubber band, carefully wrap everything. Get it another second time, and a third time, and for good measure, let's go around it a fourth time. So now the rubber will retain the mainspring on the hammer itself without them wanting to apply their force. And the next part will be to remove the two pins. So this pin going through here, this pin going through here, you can see them on the side. Those are holding everything to the receiver. And for this, there is this retainer clip that locks this pin and this pin. So the first step is going, the first step is going to be to lift this part upwards so we can remove the pin, and grab a hook, grab a punch, and now we can tilt the hammer towards its cocked position so we have access to the retainer. So we're just going to apply some force on the retainer, and we should be able to remove the pin. Okay, so I can pull the pin out, and you see there's this little curb in the head of the pin, and this is where this retainer clip, it has some downward force, so the wire of the retainer is in here, so you won't be able to move it. So that's the safety for the pins not to fall out under normal usage. So now we remove the pin of the hammer, we can lift the whole hammer out of the receiver, and you can now see this pin retainer here. And we're going to do the same thing for the pin which holds the hammer in the receiver. So we can't push on it now because the pin retainer is not under spring tension anymore, or not under tension anymore, because it's flat on the receiver. So we can just pull this guy out. That's why you first start with the hammer. Now you can lift the trigger out of the receiver, grab this retainer, and depending on the country your AK was made, this might look slightly different. I've seen some without a loop and just another kind of leg up here, but the principle is the same. So this is what applies force into those cutouts, so the pin won't be able to move left or right, so it's kind of stuck in the receiver, right? So for reassembly, first you're going to drop the trigger back into the receiver, Make sure it sits nice and flush. And you're gonna grab the retainer, drop it between the trigger assembly and, well, especially not sideways, but drop it between the trigger assembly and the receiver. And the first thing is gonna be to reinstall the pin of the hammer. But what we're gonna try to do is have the retainer above. So I hope you can see this. The pin is below, the retainer's clip or whatever you're going to call it is above the pin. And we're going to install the hammer. And now we need to be careful when installing it that the pin retainer is still above the pin. So now we can get this guy, align it with the holes in the hammer, align it on the other side of the receiver, and get the pin through the receiver. So that's that. Also make sure that the hammer face of the hammer is pointing in the right direction. You don't want to install it the other way around. So now you can grab the second pin, align the retainer, align the hole of the trigger, go through the trigger and add on the other side of the receiver. So what this will do is actually lock this pin in place because there's now force being applied on the retainer. But what we have to do is push on this pin here until it hooks with the retainer pin. So now we're not quite there yet. Let me check. No, it should be visible on the other side. And for this, what we're doing is to apply some pressure on the pin so it doesn't lock up anymore. And now it just slid between, and now we can push the pin further out. Hook the retainer on the pin, and if everything's as intended, we should be good. So you shouldn't be able to move this pin out anymore. So it's stuck, right? That's what we're looking for. Same thing for this. Can you apply force? It's in there. So we're going to remove, carefully remove the rubber band without the mainspring cutting into our hands, hopefully. See, so that's what otherwise would happen if the spring ain't there. That can be a bit annoying. So they usually find their way on their own. They kind of slide in there, so they have to hook on the trigger. So now when we pull the trigger, it's under spring tension. Nice. We're going to cock the hammer, put our finger on the hammer, now pull the trigger. You can see the disengager working, the trigger is working as intended. It can be reset. So everything's in place. Just double check the pins. I can't push them out. We're good. It's being held in place by the retainer here. Great, so everything's installed. What's left is the safety guiding into the receiver, pointing straight into the sky. Hook it on the other side, and now what you'll have to do is decock the hammer. Now you can reinstall the safety, put it on fire, cock the hammer, put it back on safe. Now we can test the safety. So that's working as well. Put it on fire. Firing works. So that's how you remove your hammer as well as your trigger. Maybe you need to reinstall a new mainspring. Maybe you want to drop in an aftermarket trigger. Maybe you just want to give it a thorough cleaning. So that's how you do it, and you're good to go.